Hi, everyone, and welcome to Professionals Unplugged. Thank you for joining me for another candid conversation about work. I'm Inga Hebden, your host and owner of Medea International. So, I'm an executive coach, and my mission is to improve people's impact and success, especially by helping leaders elevate their so called executive presence. And today I have a wonderful guest, and I'm really excited to have Kevin Hyer here with me. He is the founder and CEO of the Higher Calling Foundation. And this is a really incredible nonprofit dedicated to dismantling the stigma surrounding the substance use disorder in the workplace and providing second chances for those in recovery to rebuild their careers. With a G-Day from the University of Baltimore School of Law, Kevin specialized in labor and employment law at a prestigious Philadelphia law firm before channeling his expertise into advocacy. He also serves as board counsel for Faces and Voices of Recovery, underscoring his commitment to his cause. Kevin's personal journey with methamphetamine addiction and his path to recovery deeply inspire his belief that everyone deserves a second chance. Join us as we delve into Kevin's remarkable story and let's have a conversation about how we reduce the stigma of substance abuse in the workplace. So, Kevin, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with
Sure.
you about the stigma, what we can do differently. But before we delve into that, why don't you just give a little bit more context to how it all began and who you are?
Absolutely. So I'm Kevin Hyer. I'm a labor and employment attorney based in Philadelphia. And 3 years ago, I founded the Higher Calling Foundation after a really powerful experience I've had. And that was I became addicted at 39 to crystal meth, despite never having even used drugs before. I made a mistake in a moment of insecurity as I was about to turn 40 and feeling kind of lost. And I tried it. And within 8 weeks, I was shooting up in crack houses and very much out of a job.
Wow.
So I had this powerful experience of falling into serious drug addiction, IV drug addiction. And when I recovered, I wanted to give back to other people to sort of get the same second chance I did. So I formed the Higher Calling Foundation. And I used my knowledge of the workplace to help people get back into the workplace and get a second chance. And I educate businesses on the benefits of hiring people in recovery. So that's what the Higher Calling Foundation does, is we help people who are highly motivated in recovery get a second chance at a career. And we educate businesses on the many reasons to hire people in recovery because it's good business.
Yeah.
But yeah, my background, I never used drugs. I tried it in a moment of insecurity. I'd broken up with another attorney, another man, and I tried it feeling lost at 40, and here we are. So I'll talk a little bit about breaking the stereotypes of hard drug addiction too, to
Yeah.
show that across all backgrounds, and yes, one time is enough to get addicted.
Yeah. Well, in particular to crystal meth, and although I don't want to downplay all the other hard drugs, right? If you try those in particular in a moment of weakness, insecurity, and if that's kind of translating, I'm just interested. What was your experience doing? Was anybody aware of your situation whilst you were still working at the law firm? How was?
Well, my performance fell so quickly, and I was let go over it. Now we're going to circle back to them in a minute or two down the road in this conversation. But yes, no, I was dismissed for poor performance. I think my friends saw it, but it was so unlike me because I was certainly not into the drug scene before it, and it's hard to bring this stuff up with people. But we then went into COVID, so everybody was kind of hiding at home, which I
Mm,
think allowed my addiction to go longer than it really should have. And it ended with me overdosing and spending 10 days on dialysis. And it was at that point my parents realized their 40-year-old son had a drug problem. So I obviously wasn't living at home, you know. And then I did go into rehab and I came out of it and I have recovered. I had a severe crystal meth use disorder and I came back from it. And I'm not the only one.
yeah.
Absolutely can recover from serious addiction to whatever you're addicted to. But it takes a helping hand. You can't just shake your finger at someone and say, stop using drugs, like get it together, pull up on your bootstraps. Yeah. So that's my passion with it. is to tell this story, this crazy story that in a million years I never saw coming. It was a momentary mistake. Someone offered it to me. I was feeling insecure. I said I was single, about to turn 40, and I just went with it, and I got addicted the first time.
Yeah.
But we're doing great stuff today to add it. And it was kind of neat to circle back to the law firm, although I don't work with them. I collaborate with them, and they're our key partner around this work in the public eye. So I do training with my old colleague around this topic, and we tell our story, to bring a face to what does recovery friendly look like,
Yeah. So what does recovery in particular, in the workplace look like, and what the kind of support you're delivering?
Well, I think it depends on the individual and the industry. Obviously, it can certainly recovery friendly could mean giving someone who's highly motivated a second chance. And second chances come in different form, but that would be one. We would be having leadership in recovery or having family members in recovery and them willing to share that story. It would be, say, for example, if you have open jobs, take those postings to some of the local rehabs that have alumni programs. That's what they're called. So that you can promote to their alumni these jobs. And of course, you don't have to hire any particular person, but what it says to those people that they have worth and value, and that we think that experience might actually help you with our bottom line, because it does. Now, if you had a job posting where you said, hey, women, people of color, LGBT, veteran, and people in recovery especially encouraged to apply. Because I think the recovery experience really develops skills that help the bottom line. I really mean that.
How so? Explain a little bit more.
Sure. It's the experience of recovering from addiction is a powerfully transformative. You have to look in the mirror and look at the harm you've caused and take ownership. The mistakes. I made a mistake. It was a mistake, but it was still on me. I tried it. No one put a gun to my head and said, smoke meth. Is taking that ownership and looking in the mirror and doing that hard work to recover, making amends with the people you've hurt. Finding many people, it's a higher power or not. You don't have to have faith to recover from addiction. It's a gratitude. It's a perseverance. It's hard. It is hard to come back from serious addiction, even for people with privileges. It's hard. And you live with it for life. And it doesn't ever go away. You don't forget a feeling.
Yeah.
Okay? But you learn how to manage it. So when you hire someone in recovery, you're getting someone who's very appreciative, very hard work, grateful, tends to be open to collaborating, will certainly admit when they make a mistake. I mean, if they're working a valid program, well, it's soft skills, yeah, but it's stuff that has it's got value. I mean, I think it's a form of DEI.
Yeah. So that sounds like people who are in recovery and are given a second chance, obviously, besides being very grateful, you create also a stronger bond to the person and the people who are hiring that individual, as well as to the company, the cause or the purpose of the company. But it also sounds like those individuals are a lot more, self-aware, right? Because I believe, or my assumption is, in order to recover, in order to go on that journey and really overcome the addiction, you have to do a lot of work on your self-awareness in terms of what are your triggers, what are the potential things which trip you up. So it raises the level of awareness.
Love it.
And the level of resilience.
It takes a lot of resilience. And I've often said, the people who come from the hardest situations are some of the strongest. There was a double-edged sword to getting addicted at 40. On one hand, people were much more judging, way more judging. But it also was easier to come back from. I had a career of 10 years practicing law and full, and I had a red. I had, money I might not have had when I was 20. But, when you see young adults who got addicted in high school to drugs or alcohol, and they're 25, living in a sober living house, rebuilding their lives, they are strong people. It's a lot of resilience. I love that word around overcoming addiction because of the shame and seeing that, you can't overcome great adversity. And there's a lot of pain around addiction too. I mean, addiction's often driven by trauma, unmet pain in your life. It may start out as just having fun, but after a while, that's what it becomes. And of course, the addiction generates more trauma as you alienate people in your life, often lose a job. For many people, this is fortunately not part of my story, but they get arrested, have a professional license, they may get in trouble with a bar association, which fortunately was also not part of my story. But, all those things make life harder. So what I also say to people is addiction's progressive, tends to get worse. And it's a fatal illness. I mean, you absolutely can die from addiction. So the sooner you address it, the easier it is to come back from it.
Yeah.
It's so much harder once you do have criminal issues and licensure issues. You can, and I know people who have, but it's harder. So what I say to the employers is, if you've got people who may have a substance use disorder, let's address it now. Let them feel safe coming to say, look, the reason my performance is slipping, and the reason I'm coming to work late is because I have a drinking problem, right? Or I have a drug problem. They're a functional drug.
Yeah.
Let them go to rehab. You then cut down on that lost productivity and the cost of the turnover when you inevitably have to fire them. They get arrested. They have a serious health issue. Now, I did have one of those, but I recovered from. That's what we're trying to make as a business case. All of it on both sides, before they get into recovery and after.
So what are the other kind of stigmas people are facing, or what makes them so afraid to really speak up?
Well, for some reason, our society, and I suspect this is true of all societies in the world, really finds this topic taboo. And I've said to people, I don't understand it because almost all of us relate with it, at least indirectly. Like, you don't find many families anywhere in the world that haven't been touched by addiction, yet we do choose to stigmatize, which I just find that fascinating. I'm not going to use examples, but we can all think of things that are highly stigmatized. They're not typically things most of us really relate with. This is something we all relate with, and it's pain driving. And the generational cycle of addiction keeps cycling over and over in many cases because of the trauma. And that's why I'm also saying, you want to give back to your community as an employer by giving highly motivated, I always say highly motivated, because not everyone in recovery does deserve a second chance. But if they're highly motivated, that second chance stabilizes their lives. So the children they have tend to have less trauma. I mean, think about it. Mom and dad aren't in prison. You're going to be a little less traumatized growing up. There's not poverty. And it's kind of common sense. So that's our big thing, is how do we break the cycle of addiction? And we believe at our foundation, it's through giving highly motivated adult a second chance career.
Yeah. So how do you, in practice, how do you go about it?
Sure. So there really are two focuses in our foundation in terms of a nuts and bolts piece. We have a small program. Right now, we're not taking any more clients into it, but it exists, where we provide you services insurance doesn't cover to help you get back to work. And they're individualized. So it's, what do you need to get a second chance? And obviously, it's a given, but some of these people didn't understand this. It is a given. You have to pass the drug and alcohol test.
I was just gonna ask, well, the people already need to be clean, so to speak, and far along on their recovery journey.
They have to have some time under their belt. Now, I will never shame anybody. If you can't pass a drug test, we're not going to shame you. We're going to say this isn't the right time. Yeah. And it doesn't mean we might not be able to give you some basic advice, but we're not going to place you in the jail if you can't pass the drug and alcohol test and have some sobriety. But what we will do is we'll help you with really individualized things. And again, insurance doesn't cover it. One thing I saw when I left rehab, there's a void in the market. If someone could figure out how to make this work, they'd make a lot of money. To write a policy for insurance to clean up the wreckage of your life in the aftermath of serious addiction. Health insurance will pay for therapy. It's okay to send you back to rehab, which is, of course, not what you need. What you need is to stay sober. We'll help you with expungement of criminal issues if there are things that we think is appropriate to expunge. Okay. I'm not going to include your drug distribution charges. But something like a simple possession charge. We did a prostitution charge for a woman. She didn't need to be shamed about that 20 years ago. Time to let that go. And we did that. We will help you get a license reinstated if your driving privileges were interrupted. We'll help you get to an interview if you can. We'll even get you to work until your first paycheck if you can share it. Will you reference advocate? I enjoy that. I even do some of that myself, where you go to a former employer. You say, look, I get you can't take this person back, but would you be willing to endorse something they did well so they can move on? And usually they'll work with us on that, but they can't do it. They need someone else to do it, interview preparation, resume review. We have a mentoring program. We'll do networking events. It's neat stuff. And then the other side of it, where we're trying to really raise revenue, is selling training to businesses on how to have a showing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like it's a well-rounded service, because obviously you're taking the individual and you're providing the support to the different individual, right? Which is absolutely necessary, because it helps them in their own recovery journey to stabilize more, to feel better about being a part of society again and being integrated in society.
It gives them a sense of worth again, because it's
Yes, that's a
shame topic, especially with hard drug addiction. You're just a junkie, you're a tweaker, or well, being called a drunk is no compliment either. I mean, there's a lot of internalized shame, and that second chance, it saves your life. It gives you meaning, it gives you purpose, gratitude, makes you a good employee. And yes, it saves your life and helps your family.
yeah.
You're not going to ever eradicate addiction like smallpox, but you could go a long, long way to reducing the pain of it by helping, if I put it, highly motivated adults get a second chance.
Yeah. And then, but you're also addressing the workforce in terms of the employers.
Yeah.
Because I can only imagine that there's a lot to do as well, right? There's probably a bit of a hesitation in there in terms of, oh my God, if I am employing somebody in recovery, how long, how stable is that individual? It's probably one of the first questions I would assume you encounter.
It's not good for them to go back to work the day they leave rehab. They're not ready to. I mean, your brain takes time to heal from serious addiction. The brain chemistry is altered.
Yeah.
It probably took me a good year before my brain, I felt like, was fully back to normal. But yeah, the employers can get around this in so many great ways, and it makes them look good. I always say to them, like, and I don't do this for PR, but people respect it. I can never meet anybody who says, I don't respect second chances, as long as they're appropriate second chances. Okay. And you can help your bottom line, because one of the stats we use is that 70% of people with what could be diagnosed as an addiction are employed. They're functional alcoholics or functional drug addicts.
Yeah.
Addiction's progressive. The plane's going to crash.
At
Some
some
people
point,
get it longer than others, for sure. There's no question. Some people are better on drugs and alcohol than others, but it's going to crash. So address it sooner, because they know. Like, people talk about individuals being in denial about a drug problem or an alcohol problem. My experience was not, at least in the communities I traveled in, at least with drugs, they knew they had a drug problem, and they were making the best of a bad situation. I did. It was, how do I manage this new reality?
So what can a company do, or what even can colleagues do when they suspect something, or if they just want to create a culture where people feel like there's a safe space, they can actually open up and share this, something they're usually very fearful and feel shameful about?
Sure. Well, that's a tremendous question, because one of the things we also do is encourage employers to form employee resource groups around recovery, just like you might for LGBT or veteran. They're affinity groups.
Yeah.
And say, and our allies. So I think allyship is a real thing. One of the leaders in our organization, she's not in recovery. She's able to drink socially. She doesn't have addiction, but she believes in this cause and she supports people in recovery. So how cool would it be if you were at work, knew there was a colleague that had said, look, I'm sensitive to this. If you need to talk over lunch, I'm here. And of course, those who don't want to identify as that, they don't. They're not saying anything. They just don't get involved. And that's okay too. And for mental health, because the family is the other side of this disease, and they're in shame. My mom has done an interview about, saving an adult child from addiction at 80. And she talks about it. And it can also affect their careers too. We recently started working with people who are family members, someone with an addiction. You can demonstrate your career was truly hurt because of their addiction. We'll work with it. It's not taken off a lot, but we would do it.
Yeah. Okay. So it's creating those communities, those open conversations, making sure they're not punished by it in any shape or form when they actually opening up. I had a conversation a little while back about, which is obviously, as we know, it's not just the physical well-being, it's also the mental well-being. And I was sharing a story and an experience I had within a larger consulting firm where one of the partners, and during the onboarding sessions, was sharing that he's struggling with depression, always has and still does. And he was sharing a little bit about his journey and how the organization as well as his peers are supporting him. And I thought that is a really strong message, because you have a senior partner in an organization who's sharing their personal struggle. So I assume if somebody would actually stand up in front of a bigger audience, in particular when people get onboarded, right, which is the first
Great point.
impression
Onboarding,
for
yeah.
everybody joining. That so for me, that's years ago, and it's still resonating. I still remember it very, very well because it was so strong and so unusual.
Sure. That's a really cool idea. I like that.
Yeah. So you are an attorney, so there's bound to be a legal question in there. But do you find that there are any kind of legal considerations companies must consider when they actually deal with disclosing or creating a different culture when it comes to substance abuse amongst the workforce?
Oh, absolutely there are. And we get into that too. I mean, just one example is, addiction is a disease. It's technically, the term is substance use disorder. And then you insert whatever the substance was, like alcohol use disorder,
Yeah.
heroin use disorder. It's a disease. So you need to accommodate that under the FMLA. If they're eligible for it, that's a medical condition that you need to work with them on. Now, I always say, because I'm an advocate for people in recovery, even if you don't have to legally, it's still I think a good business practice to give people the opportunity to go to rehab one. We always say one. I'm not asking employers to keep bringing people back over and over again who can't stay sober. That's not fair.
Wow.
But one time, under the FMLA, another point is a diagnosis of addiction is a disability. Okay. Now, clearly, you don't have to accommodate that by letting someone come to work drunk or high. That's not protected. But if you were dumb enough to put in an email, I'm not going to hire you because you used to have a drug problem, that's disability discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, even a hostile work environment claim could be made. If you had a work environment where you've got people running around talking about junkies, drunks, tweakers, you get my point. I'm using slang terms that probably don't happen all the time. But if you did, that's harassment on the basis of a disability.
Yeah.
There are a lot of legal components. The ADA, how do you accommodate? Well, and a reasonable accommodation for addiction could be to go to a 12-step meeting. If you went to, they're called home group. Okay. Your group you go to regularly. And then they're not all even 12-step. There are other ways to recover than just spiritually. So that's how I recovered, but there are definitely other options out there. If you want to go to a set meeting every day, I think it's absolutely reasonable accommodation to adjust the schedule. Yeah, they have to actually go. If they're not going, you can fire them for fraudulent. But there are a lot of legal considerations too.
Yeah. You mentioned alcohol simply because it's so accessible. And one way for people celebrating is usually teams they go to bars, share a few drinks, etc. And maybe not so nowadays, but certainly a few years back, if one was in there who wasn't drinking for whatever reason, people were trying to understand, why are you not drinking? What's wrong with you? If the question wasn't asked directly, it was at least implied.
Sure.
When it comes to that addiction, what are the kind of things people can do in order to accommodate and support those who are suffering or who might have a different addiction to a different substance, but alcohol is kind of a segue into it. Let me put it that way.
It's so socially acceptable. It's not a competition, but I've often said I think alcohol is the hardest substance to overcome because it's everywhere. Nobody socially shoots crystal meth, okay? But people socially drink. Thinking a little humor is appropriate sometimes. You need to lighten that. Nobody socially shoots meth, but people socially drink. So you're going to offer alcohol in a restaurant. You're not going to get offered hard drugs. You don't go to the grocery store and see drugs in a special aisle that are illegal, but you'll find alcohol. What I will say is I'm not saying having an office event that had no alcohol at, because obviously there are people who socially drink, and that's okay. Alcohol is legal if you're over 21. But don't turn it into a total booze fest. Be conscious of the fact that you're going to have people there that may not want to drink. So have other options, or if you're going to serve alcohol, keep it to 1 or 2 drinks, And the way I've also put it is, recovery is a community. Imagine having a holiday party that your Jewish or Muslim employees felt disincluded in. Most corporations today, thankfully, wouldn't do that. Well, that's kind of what you're doing if you have a holiday party that's all about alcohol.
Yeah.
And I've seen some neat ice cream social done around this to get alcohol out. Yeah, like think of the best ice cream you've ever had as a sundae. There's some cool things you can do around it.
Yeah.
You know, I underestimated when I got into this just how hard this topic is. We got to change the narrative around this topic. We've got to make it safer for people personally and professionally to talk about substance use because the pandemic led to a surge in it. You know, I mean, it's clear the stress and isolation of it had people drinking at home or using drugs at home. You
Yeah.
know, the remote work component. You know, I mean, I remember going to rehab with people who would admit they were drunk on Zoom. So I'm like, well, I'm sure you were, and you just didn't say anything, and no one knew it. And now, or you managed to get through it somehow. You know, we got to talk about this topic.
Yeah. So it sounds like just talking about it and making sure that we raise our own awareness about it and in terms of the people around us and providing, well, at least an ear to listen to and provide that shoulder without any judgment. And obviously from an employer side, making sure that there is a safe space. There is no abusive language even used when people talking about other individuals.
You know, one thing I would say as we get towards the end, something a business could do for their community if they believe in it. Most communities have something along the lines of a recovery community organization. And it's a nonprofit. It's kind of a clearinghouse of resources for people in recovery and often the families supporting one of those, you know. Or here's one. We did an initiative 1.5 years ago around educating your staff on how to use Narcan in the event of an opiate overdose. And the Associated Press and Bloomberg picked that up. We've been blessed to have been on NBC and NPR's affiliates, and we've had some successes. But how cool would that be if an employer took a half an hour? All it would take, not going to take hours and hours to train someone on how to use naloxone.
Yeah.
You know, there are a host of ways that a business could demonstrate their sincerity, right?
Yeah.
And they'd be ahead of the pack, which I think would help them a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I was just as a side note, I recently just did a CPR course and as a refresher, and which I found really fantastic, one of the things in there was you learn how to give help or assistance to somebody with a drug overuse. And I thought 20 years ago, that kind of training wouldn't have been included. So fortunately, there is some progress, but I also completely agree there's a lot more to do in relation to all of it and people opening up to it and providing the platform for people to be able to open up and to feel safe enough to open up and talk about it. So
that's what we try to do with the Higher Calling Foundation on LinkedIn, is to give a platform like air cover to have some of these conversations. You know, another statistic we use is if you can get to 5 years of recovery, 85% of people stay in recovery. Meaning that the risk of, and what's also interesting is the risk of death increases over time because addiction, when you've not been using the substances, the risk of overdose is higher. But if you can get people stable, they tend to stay sober. And of course, are there going to be people who relapse? Yes, there are. That's true of any condition isn't going to be 100% treatable. Our experience has been if you get to 5 years, they're going to stay sober, you know, and it's a higher calling for us. You know, it's not just clever marketing. That's how my team sees it. And it's nice to, you know, give folks a second chance. They're so appreciative. You know, they get their children back sometimes, you know, like they have estranged family members. Like we had one kid, like, you know, I think we had it on our website. His grandmother was like 80 years old and she just couldn't bear watching her grandson destroy his life. So she hadn't seen him in a few, because she had to stay away. And he got sober and she was able to have her grandson in her life again. Like, we think we're doing really good work. And I'm not saying we do it all perfectly, but we're trying. We're trying to get our message out there.
And it's a powerful story. It's not just a powerful story in terms of your own story, but the stories you're experiencing and your colleagues are experiencing every day, and in order to help those individuals. And like you said, it's not just those individuals, it's also their network, right? The family, their friends.
Yeah.
Everybody is impacted by it in one way or another. And by helping and supporting that one individual, you're ultimately touching everybody else's life and improving that by so much, simply because you're taking away that worry for that particular individual.
Or breaking disease. What it does to the family, I think, is the worst part of it. And again, so often it's cyclical. Like, when I got to know some of these people in IV drug addiction, you hear the stories of how some of these people end up addicted to heroin, addicted to crack. I mean, there's some tough stories out there.
I know we're running out of time, but it's so interesting. How do you protect yourself from being triggered or getting drawn into, because you hear so many amazing but also heartbreaking stories. I know they are, in recovery already, but a lot of the people, I would imagine, maybe are not, just not yet there. How do you protect yourself?
Well, it's a day at a time. I work a program just like I'm an addict like anywhere else. I go to meetings. I have a program of recovery. I have a sponsor. You can do a lot to cut triggers out, because triggers are what lead people to relapse.
Yeah.
But eventually, you're never going to fully cut them all out. At some point, you have to learn how to. Okay. But what I like to promote is a positive message here, that when you give people something to live for, the meaning, some purpose, that makes it a lot easier. I don't want to lose this, and I would lose it if I went at me. I know that. So it motivates me. Let's give that same gift to other people. And that's what we're trying to do. Give somebody something to live for, the positivity, rather than saying you use it and you're going to go to prison. Well, they may well go to prison, but you're going to lose this beautiful new life you have.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way to helping people stay sober, no matter how triggered they are.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it any better. So I think those were fantastic final words. So thank you for joining me in today's conversation. And I know it's very brave still to open it up and share your story, in particular in a world like this where we still have a lot of stigma around it. So I appreciate it. And I'm very grateful that you did this with me today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Professionals Unplugged. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you'd like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. And if you like to hear even more, check out my website, www.medeaintl.com, for insights, connecting, and coaching. Until then, unplug and look after yourself.